we'll make a start. Welcome everybody to this AMBIT webinar. It's really great that you've joined us. We, like lots of other people, are trying to get used to digital ways of doing things, and one thing that we've learned is that this live event isn't necessarily the best way to run one of these events, but we're gonna try our best. So what we'd really like you to do is, if in the top right of your screen you'll see two little speech bubbles with a question mark, and it says Q&A, but really you can put anything in there. So we'd love it if you could just type into the ask a question box and tell us and where you work and anything else. And throughout this webinar, you know, type comments in there, ask us questions, and we'll either answer them by text, or we'll sort of read the questions out and answer them between us. I see that one person has already asked, have we got any chocolate? And I'd like to share that yes, I have got some chocolate, but obviously can't share it with any of you because you're not here. So let's just have a look at the plan for today. So first we're going to be hearing from Dickon Bevington, who's going to be doing about a 20-minute talk on how AMBIT might help us in these kind of strange times that we find ourselves in. And then during that, if you just want to make some comments, tell us how you've been managing, ask some questions in that text box, that's great, and we'll respond to those. And then we're going to hear from some people in the AMBIT community who are really doing this stuff, you know, out there live, kind of around the world, really. So we've got Ash from BIP, we've got Owen coming in from Brooklyn Mines in New York, and Alex from Brighton and Hove. And then we'll kind of have if you just make kind of comments and ask questions for Ash and Owen and Alex, after they've just a bit, we'll do a kind of another question and answer, and then we'll kind of summarize things. And maybe it'd be really great to have people's feedback on how they find the webinar, and whether something like this, maybe using different software where we can see you and hear you, might be something you're interested in the future. So now we're just going to introduce a couple of members of the AMBIT team who are also here with us, and we've got some of the team who are logged in as attendees, so you kind of won't hear from them, but you might see comments that they've typed.
So, I think what I have to do is I'm trying to technology. Liz, I think you have control of the. I can't.
Okay, let's go over to Laura then, if you just want to unmute and say hi to people.
Hi there. It's quite strange knowing there's so many people but not being able to see you, but I'm Laura Talbot, for those of you that I don't know already, one of the programme leads within AMBIT. So yeah, thanks for kind of joining us, because I know yeah, everybody's got such a lot on, but it's just really nice to connect up with people.
Okay, and then also want to introduce you to Marianne, who lots of you will know.
Yeah, hi everyone. I sort of share Laura's strangeness with not being able to see people, but hi, I'm the assistant psychologist to the team, and I predominantly help people with the online AMBIT manual and sort of manualising in teams as well. And today I'm also going to try and capture a bit of the learning as the discussion goes on throughout the session, so we'll be able to share that with everyone after as well, so that'll be cool.
Excellent, thank you. So let's move on to you, Dickon.
Move on to me.
I'm gonna send your face live,
and I'm gonna just put my slides on. Right. Are we there? No, hang on, we haven't got my slides yet. Put that in, send live. Nearly there. Okay. I hope that everybody can hear what I'm saying. Is that the case? Liz, if you've got a microphone and you can speak, is that
yes, absolutely. I think people can see your slides and your face quite.
It's really lovely and it looks like there's a lot more people have turned up for this than we were expecting, optimists as ever. So I'm going to get sort of straight in. Really, we were trying to think around how does what AMBIT talks about potentially just help us at a time when everybody's having to reinvent what we're trying to do. What I'm going to try to go through is a very brief reminder. Some of you will be very well acquainted with the idea of mentalizing, the sort of load-bearing axle that carries everything that we do. And then I'm going to say again very briefly just a little bit about AMBIT as an approach to working with complex, risky, uncertain situations. How we use mentalizing in more directions than just what we do with young people or clients or patients. And then in particular, the kind of, if you like, the heart of what I want to talk about is this idea of one of the tools that we use to help teams become, in our language, to become well connected. And that's this process called thinking together. And then we'll throw it open and have maybe some questions will have arisen. I'm hoping my colleagues will be looking at the written Q&As that will come in. We'll have a look at those with various of us answering, and then we'll hear from some other workers in different teams and services and some of the ideas and experiences that they've got at the moment. So I hope that makes some sense, and that's what I'm gonna press on with now. So mentalizing. Well, mentalizing, my sort of icon of mentalizing, for some reason it isn't my own dog, who's much more handsome than this dog, but it's that notion of looking at things or people in particular from a different perspective, your head on one side. How do we know that someone's mentalizing? They're demonstrating certain behaviors actually, and one of them is curiosity. Could be curiosity about themselves. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why do I keep repeating these things? Or it could be curiosity about other people. Why is this woman walking towards me or running away from me? What's going on in her mind that makes that make sense? They may be demonstrating also a capacity to not know, or to know that seeing inside minds, even my own mind, is to some extent impossible. Think of a mind as a light bulb that's one of those frosted light bulbs rather than a clear one. We know something's going on inside it, but we can't see exactly what it is. And somebody who's mentalizing is kind of demonstrating that. They're not mind reading. That's the opposite of mentalizing. People who are mentalizing are aware of the fact that emotion doesn't help this process. That actually, if there's a lot of emotion in the air, mainly fear or anger, but high levels of passionate love are the same, it becomes more difficult to have that kind of calm, reflective, balanced, making sense of people's behavior that mentalizing is all about. And people who mentalize demonstrate that they can tell coherent stories really about how I or you might have come to be doing or saying the things we're doing on the basis of the last few hours of my life or even the last few decades of my life. We can kind of string things together, or at least we're making an effort to. And finally, the bit that everyone likes about mentalizing is that, when mentalizing is alive, there's scope for humor. Shakespeare wrote about the comedy of errors. Human beings are really, in a sense, misunderstanding machines. We're very good at misunderstanding each other, rather better at misunderstanding each other than we are at understanding each other. But mentalizing is the process of coming or trying to come to the point where I can understand my misunderstandings and perhaps have a bit of a laugh about it. The other key factor about mentalizing is that we're not very good at it, or rather evolution has designed it to be really fragile. And why is that? Well, when my mentalizing is occurring, it tends to be when my stress and my arousal system is quiet. But if a tiger's walking towards me, it's of very little survival value to me to engage that slow, reflective, multiple perspective taking thinking that involves mentalizing. In the case of being approached by a tiger, I need certainty, and I need it kind of immediately, and I need action pretty immediately. And these are two of the ways that we recognize as being sort of, if you like, non-mentalizing, but they may be rather useful in certain contexts. The other non-mentalizing approach or style that we recognize is what we call the pretend mode. It's where we get into a little bit of a waffle. We fall into love, the idea of words, the love of words, the love of ideas, without connecting to the reality that actually for you guys, too much more of this kind of talk in a world where COVID means that you are actually not able to speak with each other as easily. You don't have that day-to-day reassurance of just being around each other. It might start to feel that some of these intellectual or academic ideas are not kind of what you're after. And that will be me falling into a kind of pretend mode. So the critical things to take away about mentalizing is it's fragile. It's fragile in our clients, our patients, but it's also fragile in us, the workers. And for me, that's one of the most important bits about mentalizing, is it levels the playing field between the worker and the client, that actually we're all dealing with this fragile machinery. So based in the brain, prefrontal cortex, you can see when it's working or not, but based in a brain, or able to be used in a brain that's developed in relationships. And this is one of the critical things that we move on to why AMBIT really stresses the need for a team. That the mother, if you like, imagines the baby's or the child's identity into its existence, and the child, looking at the mother's face, hearing the mother's words, sees her imagining of who they are and why they're behaving in that way. And it's through that that her ideas about the baby's self begin to be kind of taken in and help us to build a sense of me as an individual having agency. So there's a social element to what we're talking about, because a mother who, particularly in this case, is pregnant, perhaps isolated in a small family house with 2 or 3 young kids, pregnant, her husband might be a kind of key worker who's out all day, she can't do it. Her capacity to mentalize her child is going to be highly reliant on the fact that she's got maybe telephone contact with her mum, maybe her sister, maybe a mental health worker. And these workers themselves exist in networks. In other words, what we're saying is that you could look at mentalizing as something that goes on in my brain, but it is developed in a relationship context, and actually my capacity to mentalize is a direct measure of how much I have a functioning network of minds around mine. So that's the clue. Mentalizing then sits right at the heart of AMBIT. It's the axle that kind of carries all the load. And we say in AMBIT that we're not so interested only in mentalizing going upwards in the work that we do with our client. We think that if you're not equally in a structured, disciplined way, mentalizing each other as a team that in our phraseology is well connected to each other, then you're not able to keep this wheel going round. And likewise, as a team, we've got to mentalize all the different professionals and other agencies and the informal networks around our clients that create their networks and the networks we have to work with, rather than us becoming rather non-mentalizing and adding to what we describe as disintegration. And then the final quadrant, the bottom, all of this rests on our ability as a team of workers to learn, and learning and mentalizing are very closely linked. And I guess the eruption of the kind of COVID crisis really forces us to use this model. How do we learn to work in a COVID world? And I think that's what I want to sort of move on to now. So I'm going to just talk about one more area that makes sense of this approach called thinking together, and then we'll just go through that and I'll finish. And this is a phrase that kind of came out a little while ago called the team around the worker. And most of the people in our field with young people and families, but adult teams talk about the team around the family or the team around the client. The team around the child however you phrase it, is the conventional, ordinary, and very wonderfully effective way of delivering services. But it's fundamentally about our individual roles, our skills, and our responsibilities. And in one sense, in a very efficient way, it's a rather industrial way of delivering help. As long as I can plug in the right skills and responsibilities with an understanding of a young person or a family or a client's needs, I can deliver everything that they need. Now, that works well for a lot of people, but it doesn't work well for many of the clients that AMBIT originally worked with, who struggle with lots of trusting, intense relationships. They might just about manage one. The team around the worker is just a different lens for looking at exactly the same network. But the focus here is to try to, if you like, look at this network of workers through the eyes of a young person or a client. Who has the trust? Here we're talking about a key worker, not as an organizational role, but who's key in the mind of the client. Who gets me? Who understands me? In the jargon that we use, we call this epistemic trust, a particular kind of trust, a trust in the value of what that person might have in their mind that might help me. Now, if you start thinking about that, the key worker starts to look a little bit like that mountaineer. It's a pretty wonderful place to be, but it's a pretty risky and scary place to be. And the notion of the team around the worker is the development of a culture in a team that says whoever at the moment is kind of in that trusting relationship, they need to know that the people holding their rope have a discipline around keeping an eye on them and can listen and hear when they need to, and that they can hear what's required from them. And it's that kind of conversation along our ropes that hold us together as workers that I'm going to move on to now. And it's an approach that we call thinking together. We often use this model of ripples in the pond. Anxiety is like the point where the stone drops in that water. It's chaos. It's very difficult to see any pattern right at the middle. A bit further out, you start seeing some predictable patterns called ripples. But for us workers, it's not uncommon that through the day or through the week, there'll be times when we feel a little overwhelmed by some of the stuff that we're trying to deal with. And it's in those situations that some kind of helping relationships are useful. So thinking together is a very simple framework to conduct a conversation that all of us have all the time anyway. We go and ask for help from our mates. It's what we do. But we don't necessarily do it in a very disciplined way. And we're not promising magic out of this, but we are saying that a lot of teams have found this quite transformational, which sounds a bit of an embarrassing overstatement, but I think that's how some teams would see it. That this particular approach helps people in a team take each other's minds as seriously as the minds they're trying to help. What we're thinking about is how do we get information from that poor worker who's in the middle of it out to a place a little bit further nearer the bank of the pond, if you like, where something more thoughtful, more reflective, that maybe won't have a handle on the full sort of passion of what it's like to be in the middle, but may add something different. So how do we pass the information out? And it's these 4 steps that we call marking the task, stating the case, mentalizing the moment, and returning to purpose that I want to just briefly talk through, because we think that these make a little bit of a difference, and they can certainly be used on phones, on video calls, because do you know what? That's exactly how AMBIT designed them to be used at the very beginning when we were working with outreach teams in quite kind of high stress situations where workers were isolated. So I'm going to talk briefly through these 4 steps, and then I'm going to stop. The first step is the one that most people, most of the time in most helping conversations, completely miss out. How I know that is because I'm like most people. It's incredibly easy to move straight into telling you what the problem is and assume that you know exactly what it is I want. Marking the task is a disciplined approach that says I'm not going to just start telling you all about the family I've been speaking about and the worry I've got about their risk plan or about why I feel so kind of despairing and helpless, and you know, what's this? I'm normally quite a tough. I'm not going to start telling you the story until I've told you what it is that I think. And the clue is what it is I think. In other words, I have to mentalize myself a little bit first, that I might be coming for the why question. Why am I approaching you? What is it that I want? Marking the task is turning a conversation upside down, starting by trying to define in broad terms what a good ending would look like. And we don't care what the task is to some extent, whether it's check out my risk plan, help me not feel so despairing in terms of this client, you know, give me 2 or 3 new ideas about how to approach this family because everything I've tried doesn't work. What the task is not the issue. The issue is the person who's going to try to help me clear about what it is I think as a needy worker that I need. So once we've marked the task, which might take a little while, might take a few minutes to really clarify it, once that happens, then we can get into what normally most help-seeking conversations start with. We call this stating the case, but you could call it telling the story if you like. The nature of that stage is also rather similar to marking the task. It can feel quite tough. It's a deliberate attempt to create quite a boundaried start to these conversations. You don't start telling me all the details until I'm clear, as the person trying to help you, that I've understood what I think you're after. That helps me listen with a bit more focus. But also, when you are telling me the story, you've given me permission, because we're thinking together, to be a little tough. And occasionally I might say, can I just hold you there? Are these the bones of the story that I need for this task? Or are we getting into a bit of storytelling? We can get a little anxious, like that ostrich, as if I just tell you all the words, it'll all make it better. Or we can fall in love with the stories that are a little diverting. So it's a focused telling of what you and I think I need to know in order for me to be able to help. Those 2 steps are quite tough and boundaried, and you can kind of get away with that if both of you know that the 3rd step is coming. And that's a step that we call mentalizing the moment. Remember that mentalizing happens when things are a little calmer. So when I'm trying to be helpful, when we get to that step, I try to change maybe even the tone of my voice. Talk a little softer, talk a little calmer. I try and change my posture if they can see it, kind of take a slightly more relaxed approach, because that's where mentalizing can happen, where we're talking as if there isn't an end to this conversation, as if just for this moment we can muse, we can imagine, which is kind of what mentalizing is about. We use this picture from the airline industry to remind us that the first person to mentalize, if I'm the helper and you're the helpee who's come for help, is not the client, is not the other workers in the field who are driving you crazy, perhaps. It's you. First mentalize the worker who's here with me. And that might not look any different than me just saying, God, that sounds really horrible, that sounds awful. Showing you in some way that feels authentic, that I can kind of understand why you might be feeling a bit stuck or worried, in a way that when you look at me is believable, not like perhaps it looks at the moment. I'm kind of faking it because I can't see any of you at all. But mentalizing the moment is about this idea of creating a real connection between the helper and the helped, because it's that opens our mind to start to, you know, be able to let new ideas in. We call that epistemic trust. So first place your own mask as a worker before we start thinking about and mentalizing the client. Once we've got a bit of connection, yeah, sure, we might want to mentalize what's going on for this young person or this family or this other worker who's behaving in ways that are quite difficult to make sense of. And we allow that sort of reflective moment to go on. As the helper, I'm kind of sworn into holding the 4 steps in line. And the 4th step is that I've got to bring us back to what the task was. You wanted a bit of an overview of your risk plan, or you wanted some help about the way you're feeling about this. What I tend to do when I'm returning to purpose is the first thing is I offer to my colleague for them to sort of, they might have, the answers might be there already, having had a little bit of a chance to feel that they're experience is understandable, they might have had some new ideas. So I might invite them to think whether there's anything that they're making sense better of what they think. And then they may well ask, well, you know, but I do want a different opinion. And sure, of course, I'm willing to offer that. So we're trying at the end to bring this back to something that's digestible and that particularly is close as we can get to what the worker who comes for help actually defined at the beginning, what kind of help they think they wanted. There's a line, I think, in the Bible, you know, offering a stone when you ask for bread. We're trying to offer bread if somebody asks for bread. We're trying to offer some help that feels like the help that person has already helped me understand the kind of thing they're wanting. So that's thinking together in a nutshell. You can do it on a phone, you can do it over a video link. The key thing is it's about taking each other's minds as seriously as the minds of the people, the very vulnerable people that we're trying to help. So there's the same 4 steps here written out with a little bit more text, which I've kind of described, so I'm not going to go into, but I think there's a film, well, there's certainly a film on YouTube of the same talk. So thank you very much for listening. There may be some questions that you've used with this ask a question button, I think, and I hope that we can now move back into a more collaborative and helpful frame of mind. Let me now change. Oh, there we are. Now.
There we go. So we've got a couple of questions which I'll read out. So we've got one from Michael, who's sort of said that he's got the impression that in the last sort of in recent days that there's a potential for kind of a loss of trust between the management in the workers. You know, are you really working at home, or are you sort of, you know, are you doing the washing and baking cakes?
Yeah, I don't feel that it should be me answering all these, but yeah, I can connect with that. I think there's all kinds of new approach, sort of this very thing. I was people see into your private life in a way that is not usual. In Microsoft Teams, normally you can blur the background, and I always sit here when I do my and normally I can blur the background, but I can't blur it on this Microsoft Live events, and so everybody's seeing this is the original AMBIT wheel. But it's that kind of thing. There's an intrusiveness that I think is something that we're all kind of dealing with.
Okay, and a question from Beverly in Walsall. You know, how well, I'll publish it in a moment. How well do we do this, and how can we do this well virtually without that social space and place and being close in that physical? Because we use a lot of body language, those sort of cues that are perhaps harder to pick up on this way.
Yeah, I think that's what so many of us are feeling. I mean, I think there's some technical tips, one of which I'm trying to demonstrate now. I'm looking at my camera, which is a weird and the wrong thing to do because it's just a little black hole. But it gives you perhaps a little bit more of a sense that I'm interested in you, rather than doing what instinctively I want to do, which is to look at the faces of some of my colleagues and things on the screen, which then makes me look like I'm ignoring you. So I think there's something about gesture and physicality if you're using a video phone, but actually, you know, what about on a phone? Tone of voice has to do. I mean, I suppose our approach, AMBIT, was developed before video conferencing was really a thing, although we tried with some early versions and they were appalling. But it was designed for workers who were often working in a family home at quite long distances from the base, who are quite isolated. So we use, certainly in the NHS team I work, we use this technique with telephones all the time. No telephone conversation between members of my team. doesn't start with kind of some kind of marking of the task, but it does take a little bit of sort of practice. But I think the key thing is, do you create a team that experiences each other as being interested in each other's minds, not in an intrusive spying way, but in a way that is focused on help, and the help that you and I together are going to be better at delivering to these very vulnerable clients or patients that we work with. So I think there's, you know, lots more material about thinking together on our AMBIT manual that people should go and have a look at online, but that would be my thought about that.
You'll be pleased, I think, Dickon, that Beverly has replied saying that she can feel it. So I think when you looked right down the camera there, she felt it. So that's that's good.
Yeah.
So we've got another question that's just come through from Carleen McMillan, who's with Brooklyn Minds, and she says, with respect to managing risk in a pandemic, any tips on helping workers manage their own feelings while we learn that some of our clients are making some risky choices, maybe to go outside without masks to meet, you know, sketchy people, and coming back home to loved ones, putting them at risk?
It's a really good question, and I'm curious to know if there's other people in our sort of panel who would be better at answering it. I mean, I've got a sort of thought, which is not a very helpful thought in ways, but I'm going to offer it anyway, which is that on one level, everything's different, and on another level, well, nothing's changed. That's very much how many of the clients and patients that I've worked with over the years behave. They behave in ways that are challenging, often difficult to make sense of, often alarm me or the people around them, and my capacity to be helpful to them is directly, I would argue, directly connected to my capacity to maintain enough balance so that I can just keep mentalizing. And how do I keep mentalizing? I need to be able to notice when I'm kind of too hot to mentalize, and that's when I call my mate Laura or my mate Liz or my mate Peter or anybody else in my team, and that's what I might mark to them as a task. Look, I'm just a bit freaked out at the moment. I can't make head or tail of this. I just need to I need you to help me work out what's important. That might be a task. And, you know, I think if Laura got me sort of gabbling on the end of the phone and that was the task, I think she would have a good go at just helping me feel, well, it's understandable to feel anxious. And that connects to one of the things we often say in AMBIT trainings, which is that anxiety is part of the job description. The person I'd get really anxious about in an AMBIT team, or any team actually, is the person who doesn't get anxious. It's totally appropriate to get anxious because there's very real risks that we're working with. The question is how we manage that world of anxiety that I don't know why you guys chose to work in it, but one way or another, we've ended up and chose to work in a field that getting anxious is part of the job.
I was just going to add a couple of thoughts. I don't know if you can hear me all right. Liz or Dick can give me a wave if it's working okay. Yeah, I just think this is really tough for lots of different reasons, but I can relate to it as quite a live dilemma, because I think the uniqueness of this situation is that we're all affected and potentially quite triggered by hearing about choices other people are making or not making to keep themselves safe. And I think one of the things that's helped me with that is, I mean, it sounds kind of a bit simple, but I think working out where my responsibility lies for that, which has only really happened through chatting it through with colleagues and almost getting into a bit of a place of trying to manualize and learn from conversations that we're all having with people that we're trying to support to work out where does our responsibility best lie, and in some ways, like other risky behaviours, how do we best help people think through the choices that they're making. But it is hard because I think these things are worrying for us too, and we might be connecting to different ways that people are responding because they're connecting to people that we might know around us or worries that we might have. So I do think some of the extra feeling comes because a lot of this, I think, is a shared experience for all of us at this time.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. There are precious few benefits in a COVID world, but maybe I'm accused of pathological optimism, but maybe one is that there seems to me to have been a significant connection, that people are more connected through our shared suffering. Maybe that's what through time is what mostly connects humans, that actually to be human is to some extent to suffer, to be anxious, and at least our understanding is more immediate because we're all suffering to some extent in quite similar ways, feeling hemmed in, feeling kind of anxious about the future, about people we love. So there's a sort of reconnection along with all the obvious horror. Any other questions? Liz, you've been doing a great job looking at questions. I haven't been doing a good job at that at all.
Yes, so I mean, we've got some nice comments as well as some other questions where we might not be able to get round to all of them, but just a nice comment from Jenny, who works in a CAMS, who says that it's so important to convey to the team that whilst we're apart, physically we're not alone. So they're having daily morning Skype calls in order to stay connected.
I think that's so wonderful. We did a thing the other day where we were all just ploughing through some quite boring sort of administrative tasks, and there were about 4 of us who we just left Microsoft Teams running, and it was just great for me. I was just sat in my little room and I could hear people kind of muttering and bashing and kind of just banging around, and it was just so reassuring. I think other people are having sort of Zoom lunches and things like that, but I think that just an explicit reminders of our connection are very necessary at this moment.
Yeah,
I'm wondering if it's time for us to invite some of our other people who are actually doing stuff out there and have some thoughts about it, whether now's a good time to perhaps invite some of them to just have a little bit of presenting.
Let's go over to Ash from VIP. Ash, if you want to tell us a bit about who you are and what you do and how things have been for your service over these weeks.
Okay, cool. Can you guys hear and see me?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to just throw out a little caveat just to start off with. It's a madhouse. I've got 3 kids, feral kids, just running around. You could interrupt at any time, and it's really true actually. Like we've been doing this really cool thing, staying connected each morning in the organisation with morning Microsoft team meetings, and I think we all agree that our team meetings are like an advertisement for contraception. It's just madness. There are kids just in and tearing up the place, but it's really healthy. It reminds us that we're all in the same place. So let me explain to you a little bit about the Violence Intervention Project. In a nutshell, we provide therapeutic outreach support for young people who are caught up in serious youth violence. We work predominantly in West London. Our unique sales point, I guess, is that this idea of relating serious youth violence to shame. So at the VIP, we believe that there is always a narrative around shame and violence. And it's really clear when you work with young people who are caught up in this world of serious youth violence. It's as obvious as things can be that what triggers violence is this need to sort of protect a very fragile sense of self by erecting a sort of like a shield around that includes a physical assertiveness. So where did the AMBIT methodology come in? So we were obviously trying to package a therapeutic intervention for the young people that we were engaging with. And the AMBIT model sort of landed on our laps from one of our clinical supervisors who had worked at a previous team, and they had come along to the Anna Freud Centre, and he said it would be really helpful for us to come along and to do the training and then to roll it out across our organisation. And it's been phenomenally transformative. It's enabled us to create sustainable relationships, relationships with our clients, but also like help us to create relationships with an equal emphasis on sustainable relationships with other professionals, and again stuff within the team. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about how we've been doing that virtually, especially with the thinking together practices over the last couple of weeks. So our typical sort of like pre-COVID-19 work was about providing this other type of relationship. So we were out there in the streets, out on the blocks, we'd be going out to trap houses. That's places where like young people are selling drugs, and bringing them back. Would be going and meeting young people in custody suites, in prisons, meeting people at a point where they were amenable to the work because it's all voluntary and done by consent. We're not a statutory organisation, and I think that creates this really equitable relationship. And at the Violence Intervention Project, we're really keen on sort of like redressing the power dynamics that often exist between young people caught up in this world and sort of like professionals around them who seem to impose themselves, and can bring a lot of shame along with that. So I guess like how life has changed since COVID-19 and how we've adapted. Well, maybe I'll try and make my way around the AMBIT wheel in my head, if I can. We've done a lot of things. Let's start with thinking about how we're working with the clients. So there's been a massive emphasis, obviously, on virtual contact. A lot of the young people that we work with obviously have access to social media, so we've been refining our practice and trying to come to terms with this really challenging thing about how do you pick up on all this, like the subtle cues of communication when it's no longer face to face. Like a phone conversation is a great medium, but we miss so much when we're not able to look into somebody's eyes, able to sort of like make sense of their body language. So we've been using a lot of virtual media programs, WhatsApp messaging, Snapchat. We've even been using Skype. And one of the things that's been really interesting actually is we've started using a lot of online gaming platforms. So sort of conventional things like Call of Duty, which is a terribly violent game, and I don't really condone us using it, but do you know what, it's great because when we're on there, we're alongside our young people, we have the opportunity to talk to them, to see them, but we do things as well like more conventional stuff. We also are doing things like working on online chess. Like we've had these amazing opportunities to set up games with young people where we've been able to speak to them whilst playing with them. It's just been a really exciting time for it. I think that we're all a little anxious. We're all trying to figure out, you know, how do we sustain these meaningful relationships that we've spent months, sometimes years developing with really hard to engage young people. And we've all been kind of scrambling around. I think one thing that's been really helpful for us, and I think we touched on it, is that so many of us, including our clients, including other professionals, we're all kind of like trying to figure this out. We're still trying to figure out how we stay connected. And so there's something like quite democratizing and equitable about that. We're also doing this, we've done this really cool thing. So obviously we're really interested in our work with sort of like scaffolding existing relationships. So we're always trying to buy into the other relationships in our clients' lives. Particularly at this time, we're thinking about the relationships with their families. So what we piloted last week is a mobile food bank. And we literally, with our very minimal funds, we went out to the local Costco and we went and bought up loads of essentials, and we contacted all of our clients and their families, and we just said, you know, like, what can we do to support you in this really challenging time? We want to stay connected. We recognize it's a difficult time for all of us. How can we help? And so we went out last week and we did some food drops at the door to, I think, about 15 of our families. All in, actually, we didn't just do it in the boroughs that we work in. So many of the young people that we work with are looked after children, so they're placed in really far-flung places. Some place like Herne Bay, which is past Essex, in Norfolk, I think, down in Brighton we delivered, and some of the other London boroughs. So we went and did that, and that was really well received. We actually just got confirmation yesterday from local charity. We submitted an application to continue this work over the coming weeks and months, and we've been successful. So we've got now a couple of £1,000 that we're going to be able to go and continue this work, so that we're able to continue all that amazing work that we've done, building into the existing relationships, and continue to scaffold that and continue to make sure that all of that hard work isn't being undone by like the restrictions around quarantine. But then like doing the face-to-face work or going out and doing this, it raises a lot of questions around managing risk. So like the question is, what happens when a situation arises, and it has arisen with our clients, when face-to-face work is needed, where they literally called us up, a young person in a fractious home environment with a history of violence has just assaulted a family member, and this happened last week, and they've called one of our therapeutic outreach workers, and the question is, well, what do we do now? Like, this is a cry for help. It's also a reflection of the incredible relationships that we've been building. It kind of reaffirms the fact that we are providing these sort of like highly attuned caregiving relationships, and the young person is calling up and asking for help. So one of the things that we've done at the Violence Intervention Project is we've developed a really great dynamic risk assessment tool, which enables us to sort of assess these dynamic situations on a case-by-case basis. And that's just one of the ways that we're able to make sure that we're keeping ourselves safe. It's one of the things that our trustees have insisted that we do, because they're not going to let us go out and meet clients unless there's a cast iron reason for that to happen. And again, it just kind of comes back to how the AMBIT wheel has really helped us to kind of make sense of what's going on in this sort of like really fractious and potentially confusing time, really making us, you know, attend to and address this issue of managing risk. That's an integral part of our work. It'd be really easy for us to just go, we want to go and save you, we're going to, you know, come and do this amazing work. We have to make sure that we're looking after our team, we're looking after our organization, and also, you know, looking after the young people and clients we work with. So I think maybe moving around the wheel and thinking about how we continue to work with the networks. That's, for us, we think about the networks, it looks like statutory services, so youth offending teams, social care providers, housing, antisocial behaviour units, the police, etc. I'm sure everybody's kind of dealing with this idea and this question and this tension. How do we address this? Like, I guess it's a heightened capacity for disintegration in the professional network at this really challenging times. Well, again, we found that it's not so challenging. Like, we're able to just buy into this whole virtual contact thing. The first couple of weeks were mad, you know, people trying to figure out how to use things like Microsoft Teams and Zoom, and it was really funny. I got on here a couple minutes earlier and I was watching all the Anna Freud Centre team trying to figure out how to do it. Just really refreshing that we're kind of all in the same space of muddling through and trying to maintain like the impression, the facade of professionalism, but we're all in the same boat. Like, this is a learning process, isn't it? And there's anxiety in the air. It's okay. Because we have these tools and we're going to figure it out. And I get the impression that actually we're kind of in this for the long run. So we've got to get used to this new way of working. We're even doing really cool things like using WhatsApp to create these sort of core group teams where it's different professionals from different agendas, you know, who assess risk in different way. We're able to come together and we're able to chat about cases and young people. And I've got a really great example of one of the core groups that we set up between myself, a youth offending officer, and a social worker. We're all working on the same case. Our young guy, he was out yesterday, got picked up with a bladed article. It's really frustrating, but we're able to communicate through that, and then we're able to decide maybe I can go out and be the appropriate adult, or if the social worker is going to do that instead, what I can do is contact the mum, you know, continuing this really important work about scaffolding existing relationships, offer access to our mobile food bank. You know, this is just really dynamic, pragmatic way that we're trying to figure our way through this. And I think we're all doing a really good job of it. I think everybody out there is really trying and really applying themselves. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. I hope everyone's really proud of what they're doing, because it's not easy, and there's no script that came along with this whole COVID-19 madness. So let me think a little bit about this other thing. I think there was another question about how, as an organisation, are we staying connected? I've got a baby coming in. I'm going to really try to keep it quiet. Isla, out. Thank you. It's okay, there are other people out there. She's so feral. She's like half naked and got an ice cream all across her face. Okay, so how are we working with the team? So one of the things that Dickon was talking about is this thing about being tied in. At the Violence Intervention Project, we're all remote workers. We actually work with like really potentially dangerous young people in very dangerous environments. And being lone workers, we've always prioritized this thing about being tied in, and we've always had like remote ways of doing that, whether that's logging people's movements on different apps whilst they're out in the community or traveling across the country. So we've just kind of been really thinking about how do we extend that sense of keeping key workers well connected to the team. And I think there was a question from a member of a CAMS team out there who they mentioned that actually what they're doing is they're doing these daily sessions. Well, actually we're doing that as well, and it's been so amazing. Like on a personal level, it's created structure. On a professional level, it's enabled us to really move the organisation forward. So what it looks like for us is we have daily meetings. They start at 9:30 and they finish at 10:30. And it's been sort of like an ongoing process of refinement. What it looks like today is like on a Monday, we'll meet and we'll go through all of our caseloads so that we're able to feed back into the organisation where the one-to-one work is going, you know, how effectively have we been able to maintain relationships with the clients, with their family members, etc., and with the professional networks around those individual clients. On a Wednesday, we're now manualizing. This has been like the revelation actually of COVID-19. We've always said we wanted to manualize. We are actually finally manualizing. And Rebecca, who is our AMBIT supervisor, I'm sure you're out there, Rebecca, hey. I think she's been really impressed that she's been going on to our AMBIT manual, and we're starting to really put loads of interesting stuff down there. And the best part of it is that members of the team are finally getting like the real value of manualizing together. So that's been really cool. What else have we been doing? Yeah, sorry, am I going on?
I'm gonna just interrupt just because there may be some people who are not AMBIT trained, and for them a word like manualizing might just be the final straw that
Dickon, why don't you explain my jargon? I apologize.
Well, I don't want to say too much, but it's an approach that AMBIT oh, hang on, I should probably put myself in there and go there. Manualizing is just an approach that AMBIT uses to support a team doing the bottom bit of the AMBIT wheel that I very briefly flashed up, which is learning at work. How do you get a team to mentalize together about why do we do things like that and not like that, and on what situations might we do it like that, and we use these wikis, but you know, you could do it on a post-it notes if you wanted. It would get lost and things, but wikis don't get lost. But I don't want to over dwell on that. I'm just conscious of the fact that I don't know if we've got other presenters who we want to just give some time to, because we're rushing on. Ashley, are there any other things that you want to just finish off with, or?
A couple of things. Maybe just this stuff around the manualizing was actually a really important thing that we've been doing, but also one of the ways that we've been staying connected and continuing this thing about learning at work is we've signed up to one of the Anna Freud Center's mentalization based treatment online training programs. So like every Friday we go through another module, and then it's a great place again to come together and for us to talk together and to think together. And just like manualizing, it's about creating this democratized learning space where we kind of recognize that everybody in the team has expertise, insight, skills that they have to offer. And it's been just a really great opportunity for us to stay connected, to learn from each other, and actually to, you know, really embed some of the AMBIT practices. So yeah, that's kind of me there, Dick.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's really, it's great. It's really inspiring.
Unfortunately, our other guests, Alex and Owen, haven't been able to get on to the presenting part of this, but we have got some comments and questions for Ash, if you'd be up for just hearing those.
Yeah, absolutely, go for it. I was just to say, Dick, I was trying to fill because Liz was there was a sign saying no one else is here to present, so I thought I'm going to keep talking.
Amazing.
You clearly didn't see that. That's cool.
AMBIT is basically how to wing it with kind of you know, minimal supports underneath you. Thank you, Ashley. Again.
See, that's the sign there. I was looking at that sign again. Right, I'm going to keep talking.
This is what people were seeing.
I would have been much more concise otherwise, Dick, I promise. Okay, but yeah, absolutely happy to go with like questions.
Let's get some questions. Liz, have you got some?
Yeah, so I've published some there, so if you want to look at those too, Dick. But just a nice comment for you, Ash, from Michael, who says just a bit of feedback that he's impressed, feet on the ground in the work, and at the same time clear in the plans and reflections.
It doesn't always feel like that, but thank you.
And an interesting point from Jen Parr, who, well, she sort of doesn't make this point, but I think it's in what she's saying, that, you know, for us, a lot of this online stuff is quite new, but not necessarily actually for the clients with whom we're working. So she says that she loves the image of connecting with young people on Call of Duty and online chess, and it really speaks to that idea of meeting people where they are, and that for lots of young people, even before COVID-19, online is where they are in a big way.
I really love that bit too, I have to say. Yeah, good for you.
I completely agree, and this was actually one of the things that has come up over the last couple of weeks in our team meetings, is this idea that, okay, going out and trying to communicate with people, and we've been doing these mad things like just sending short voicemail messages to each other on WhatsApp, like it's really difficult, but actually these other communication formats that our young people have been engaging in are well versed in, and if we are really thinking about, you know, providing attuned relationships, we need to be able to buy into that. And then it throws up these sort of questions, you know, around technique and practice about, you know, how do we refine attunement through the medium of a WhatsApp video call? How do we, you know, how are we able to do this sort of stuff? And we are trying to figure it out, but it's really healthy to know that the young people have been doing it for a really long time, and that they don't feel put out by this. It's a really great opportunity for us to go, all right, let's try something new. And the question is, this is the question that we're asking ourselves already, is after all this is done, like when we get back to normal, whatever that looks like, how much of this learning are we going to retain and then embed in our organizations? That's what I'm really curious and keen to find out.
I'm gonna come over because I think that is it's wonderful, and you know, I think one has to balance a sort of an optimism about some things that are actually going to change for the better as a result of this truly horrible time, with the reality that, you know, it's truly awful. But in the same way, one of the things that you were talking about, you know, the idea of sort of meeting a young person in the middle of a Call of Duty game, I thought that was a startling image. And at the top of the AMBIT wheel, we were what we're doing with the client, and I didn't go into it because there wasn't time, but we have these sort of 8 principles of a sort of principled stance, and each of the pairs that are in that wheel are in kind of tension. You get one right and the other one goes wrong, and you can't sort of you can never get the balance right, because that's life. And the client ones, the 2 principles are this notion of scaffolding existing relationship, which this seemed to me to be an absolutely perfect example. A young person, existing relationship, feels at home, feels competent, feels filled with a sense of agency in the middle of their Call of Duty game. How do I kind of scaffold something that for them is extremely important in their life? But at the same time, there are all kinds of things. The other one in that dyad is we call it managing risk. And of course, as a practitioner, as a professional, that's going into that thing there's a certain amount of risk. How do I notate what I've said? How do I have some sort of record that I've behaved in a professional and a kind of appropriate way? How can I differentiate, if I'm being kind of brutal, what I'm doing with what somebody who tries to groom young people online does? And I think it's the way that we as workers talk about these things, work them out, figure out the things that we kind of create the balance, because without that we're basically, we can't go on that mountain ridge, we can't go to the places where the young people are. So we've got to work it out, and I think what Ashley's talking about is a beautiful example of going somewhere that would have been unimaginable a few years ago, that you'd go and meet a young person in the middle of Call of Duty. And actually I think, well, do you know what, I'd rather Ashley was meeting somebody than not. But I'm also interested, and AMBIT will be interested in working out how we help them manage the risks attached to that. This is a beautiful example, I think, of learning at work.
And maybe just to add to that as well, Dickon, is this thing around respect for evidence. So how are we currently attempting to capture and understand what effective practice looks like today? You know, so how do we actually find out that in the midst of a Call of Duty game, like what is effective about that piece of work? Well, I'm throwing it out because actually, like we're trying to capture new. It's a minefield, isn't it? But we do know that there's something about that work, about maybe it's the continuity, maybe it's about the time, maybe it's about the dialogue in between active. We're still trying to figure that out. So we've really had to like open up our evidence space and think about what is it we're capturing. What are we trying to record in our session notes? And then when we have all of this, then how do we kind of filter through it and find out what's working and what's not? And no one has the answers, I think, if we're honest.
Thank you so much, Ash. I'm aware we've come to the end of our hour, and thank you so much for being sort of very AMBIT in your ability to adapt to the new circumstances. We've had a lovely comment from Alex in the comments there. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us, but hopefully people have had a chance to read that. Thank you so much. We've got some lovely comments and questions here, and I'm really sorry that we're not going to be able to go through them all. And it would be great to sort of carry on the conversations that we've started. So I guess just a question for people, you know, if we were to sort of put on more of these sorts of events, probably using better software where we can kind of see you all and hear you all, you know, let us know if that's something that you'd be interested in, because it seems to me that just the kind of ideas and thoughts that are coming through have been fantastic. So I don't know if Laura and Dickon, and if I just sort of put you on briefly and you can kind of say your goodbyes to people as we finish up. I'll put you on, Dickon. There you go.
Oh, Laura's going on. Laura's on. Oh, come on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I've been trying to reply to people's questions. Been trying to reply to some questions, but I mean, just thank you for joining. It's great to see so many people, and I'm just really appreciative of people taking the time out to join up and do something like this and to share their ideas and questions and work with us. And hopefully we'll work our way through the rest of the questions in the chat as well, and make sure we try and answer them as best we can. But thank you very much, and thanks to Ash as well in particular for your presenting. It's been great.
I've said more than enough already. Thank you, anyone and everyone who attended. Actually, we were expecting about one man and his dog, and it looked like there were quite a few people at one point. So, even now still. And you know, first place your own mask before trying to place anybody else's. take a little bit of time over the weekend if you can, to just sit quietly or walk briskly or do whatever it is to be somewhere beautiful and restful, because these are difficult times. So yeah, good wishes to everyone, and yeah, let us know if this broad idea, we can probably do it better, is a good idea, but we'd be very happy to carry on doing this kind of thing. Bless you all.
So just before we end, a few people have asked if they can see the slides and things, so we will share those on our Twitter account, which is @AFC AMBIT, and also we've got a recording of Dickon doing that talk, and also a recording of this whole thing as well, so we'll see if there's a way that we can publish that. So there were 73 people who logged in today, so that's great. It's yeah, it's been wonderful. Take care, everybody.